Hello, everyone, and welcome into FCC Talk. I am your host, John Rhodes, the Children and Family Minister here at First Christian Church. And joined with me today is Dan Stribling, the Worship Minister here at First Christian Church. Dan, how you doing today?
I'm good, John. How you doing today?
I'm doing well. It's Thursday. We always record these and post them at 8 o'clock every Thursday night when the newsletter email goes out. So I am just doing my best to get everything done today, so I don't have to take anything home this week.
Wouldn't that be nice? Tell me how that works out for you.
Right? That's the goal. That's the goal. Anyway, we are here to talk about some interesting news stories today. Had somebody talk to me about FCC Talk the other day, and they asked that we get into maybe some more topics of discussion that are a little bit more, I don't want to say controversial, but maybe life impacting. So we have a couple of different stories today that are just a little bit more hard hitting, I would say. So
Yeah, a little
by no
heavier.
means yeah, by no means are we gonna try to like depress you or anything like that, but I think there will be kind of a more honest conversation here about stuff going on in our world. So if you don't like it, please let me know. If you're somebody that you do like it, please let me know. I want to talk about the stuff that is interesting to our listeners and those out there that enjoy it. So
Mhm.
feedback is always appreciated. But other than that, we will just pick the stories that we think are the most interesting to you all, and whoever it is, whether it's Dan, CJ, or Chris, they'll come on here and we'll talk about them all. So
Yep, you
of
got it.
course, we always stay away from politics. We're not getting into political things, which can be hard right now with everything that's going on. It seems to get harder and harder to find news stories, but I believe we found three today that are not politically relevant. We also get into ministry insights. We'll sometimes talk about maybe our personal lives and get into stories about things that have happened to us that maybe you wouldn't normally hear. And then by no means is this some sermon that we're claiming everything we say is the exact right thing and you have to listen to all of it. We use scripture at times, but this is more just a kind of a conversation about stuff going on in our world instead of a sermon like that. So, Dan, our first topic, it's a rather interesting one if you ask me. Why 26% of Americans still say they have no religious affiliation? So, there was an article
Mhm.
written discussing the recent report revealing that 26% of Americans now identify as having no religious affiliation, a figure that has stabilized in recent years despite higher levels of education and income. This group, often referred to as nuns, and then indicating they have no religion, no none religion, reports increase stress and lower hope compared to their religious counterparts. Interestingly, a portion of these individuals express curiosity about the Bible and Jesus, suggesting a complex relationship with faith. The article emphasizes the need for the church to understand and engage with this demographic thoughtfully, as many nuns are not necessarily opposed to religion, but are navigating a liminal space regarding their beliefs. So, Dan, my question to you to start out this conversation is, in your opinion, can someone maintain a personal relationship with Jesus while identifying as non-religious? What are your thoughts about being a nun? Maybe you still believe in Jesus or
Hmm.
interested in Jesus in the Bible. What's your thoughts overall here?
Well, I mean, that kind of comes back to me at least to the foundational principle that belief is not the key. The key is faith, right? I mean, even the scriptures say, I mean, even the demons believe that Jesus is who he says he is, but humans have the unique component for relationship and faith in Jesus. And that's really where the defining characteristics come from. I've met people that say they believe that Jesus was real, that Jesus existed, that the historical accuracy is there. They just cannot accept him as God and as having authority over them. So it gets really, really challenging. And also when we start talking about a religious affiliation, I come from the generation where religion, the word religion was basically a bad word, right? Like nobody wanted to be associated with a religion. Everybody wanted to be either spiritual, or we would say things like, this isn't a religion, it's a relationship or something like that. And I kind of hold true to some of that. I tend to think of, if it's truth, then you're not really following a religion. You're just aligning yourself with the truth that exists, right? You're bringing yourself into the ultimate harmony with what God has created because you're connecting yourself to the creator. So, to go back to the original question of, can you claim no religious affiliation and still be a Christian? My initial thoughts is that that would be very, very hard, simply because of the emphasis, the components that come along with being connected to the body of Christ, which I guess that would be the religious component if we're going to use the terminology here. um, you're going to be lacking a significant part of what God has in his plan for you if you do not associate yourself with a church, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, no, that makes sense. I remember, growing up in high school and middle school, that was something that was big in our youth group, and a lot of different places was like, we're Jesus followers. We're not,
Hmm.
necessarily
Yep.
Christians or this, like we're Jesus followers and we're working together and, doing our best to follow God. And that was always interesting to me. I think it was Jefferson Bethke that put out the video that really went viral before you had Twitter and TikTok and all these things. I mean, I can't imagine how viral it would have gotten today with how all that stuff works today. But, I think, I forget what the name of it was, but it was basically, I'm not religious. I'm a Jesus follower, is essentially what it
Right.
was.
Sure. Sure. Sure.
And many people took that, kind of as their identity,
It
as I said,
resonated really strongly. Hmm.
right, exactly. And I always thought, that's neat. I always thought like, yeah, you don't want to be, confined to a religion. You want to be somebody that follows Jesus, but I always felt like at the end of the day, if you were going to have a belief in Jesus and actually act upon it, you would need others that also believe in him in your life. I mean,
Hmm.
I think it's pretty
Yeah.
clear in scripture that we were made for community with one another. And so for me, I was always like, well, okay, maybe I'm not religious, but I still like need a church. I still need other people that
Yeah.
believe like me. And not everybody's perfect, so I'll get over it. But it was almost like, I realize not everybody's perfect, but I still need a church to go to. So if you want to call me
Right.
religious
Right.
for that, sure, but I think you probably need it too. Like,
Yeah. Well, then the word religion is a secular term that
right,
was applied to those who follow a specific set of beliefs. Really. And I personally kind of fall on the side of I prefer the term Christ follower. And a big part of that is the Christian church originally was not called the Christian church. They took on the name and the mantle of the way, just like
right,
Christ called himself, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Well, originally, people that followed Christ, they didn't say we are the Christian church. They said we are the way. We are the followers of the way. We are walking in the path that Christ walked. We're trying to emulate, we're trying to model him. And because of walking that path, all these other things came into place as well, being a part of the body of Christ, trying to follow the teachings of Christ, trying to develop a relationship with God. All of these things were packaged in with being part of the way. So I think that I kind of tend to like that better myself. Some of that's cultural, because in 21st century America, the word religion can carry some challenging stigma, I guess,
right.
with it. But a lot of it comes down to, I think, perspective, because ultimately, whether you think of what we do as a religion or being religious, whether you think of it as following a creed or a path, or whether you think of it as just, I love Jesus and I'm going to try to do what he said. What matters is that Christ is first and we do our best to follow it.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And that's why I have always been someone that has very much so leaned into, like, I don't really care what denomination you are and stuff like that. To me,
Mhm.
growing up, that whole thing was kind of silly. Obviously, I
Mhm.
know the reason why we have different denominations. I went to Bible college, I know all
Yep.
that stuff.
Yep.
But to me, it was always like, I mean, I've said it before from the stage. When we get to heaven, we're all going to figure out we were wrong about something. Now, there's the really, really
Mhm.
important stuff I don't think you want to be wrong about, but you
Right.
know,
Yep.
we've all got beliefs and we all interpret the Bible differently in certain ways. And at the end of the day, I'm one of those people that's like, I don't want to be confined to a denomination. I don't even know if I want to be confined to Christian, like you say, but I recognize my need for other
Mhm.
people in my life who share my beliefs, and not only that they believe in God, but they are actively trying to live out that belief of, I am living my life for God. So
Yeah.
Dan, I think it's important, as you and I as church leaders, you and I as two people who work in a church, that we do ask the question, what role do you think the church should play in reaching out to those who do identify as nuns, and how can it effectively communicate its message without coming across as maybe confrontational, maybe aggressive, maybe
Mhm.
mean, all those different words in that area. What do you think?
Well, I think, the ultimate example is to try to do what Christ did. Imagine that, and try to present what we believe in truth and in love. One of the things that's amazed me the most about Jesus, the more I study the word as I get older, was his ability to completely balance truth and love. It's just, I mean, you start reading these stories after having some experiences interacting with people, and it just blows my mind how perfectly he was able to do that. It's just incredible. But I think being able to do things in truth and in love, because I do think that there is, just like there's a time for everything under the sun. There's a time for confrontation. There's a time for gentleness. There's a time for, calling out falsehoods, and there's a time for listening and understanding. And I think that the ability to be sensitive to a particular situation is very important. But ultimately, all that aside, I do think that approaching things as lovingly and with grace is going to be the most effective inroad. The practical way of how to do that, that's the $1 million question, right? Like, how do you go into spaces where you can truly interact with the people that need to hear this the most? I found this article fascinating because the realm of the nuns, and by nuns, once again, we're NONES, not the NUNS. These are
Yes.
people that have no religious affiliation we're talking about here. Most of them, it said, were like younger, professional, single men, right?
Yep.
What is the ultimate goal that our culture starts preaching into our heads from a young age? It is be successful.
Yep.
Be successful, work hard, advance yourself, acquire security and money and all this kind of stuff. That is what we hear. And isn't it funny that the group that is disconnecting themselves most from the church is the group that has achieved that cultural dream?
Yeah.
I find that fascinating. It's almost like the things of this world don't satisfy. I read that in a book somewhere. you
Yep.
know um but I think that to approach it, because basically we're talking about, I mean, and we fall into this same trap, right? I mean, everybody does. We're products of the world that we live in a lot of cases. But the world is a lie, and it's basically sold these guys a false bag of goods. And how to work into that space is kind of a challenge. What are your thoughts on this, John? I'd like to hear what you think about this too.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I've referenced it here a couple times, with a book that I have read called The Explicit Gospel. And this
Hmm.
book, so I've read this book called The Explicit Gospel, and it kind of sounds
Hmm.
weird when the word gospel means good news. It's like explicit good
Right.
news. But it outlines how, the gospel is good news to those who are willing to admit their faults and willing to, you know, say that, Jesus is Lord and that we need a savior. But to people
Right.
who don't see themselves that way, it's actually very insulting or very much so bad news that, like, oh, you're telling me I'm not enough to help
Right.
myself, and somebody else is judging me off their standard and not my standard, and things like that. And I think for me, it really has changed my view of evangelism and how I try to help other people, especially people who are in this nuns category, where it's like they might be interested in Jesus, they might be interested in the Bible, but I don't know if they are ever going to truly be able to surrender to him and understand the meaning of the Bible until something happens in their lives that brings them to that point for them to say, I do need Jesus. I do need a higher power. I do need somebody who is greater than my own understanding. And obviously, it would be much easier if everybody would just come to that conclusion on their own and we invite them to church, they come, they get baptized. Whoop de doo, here we go.
Right, right.
However, that doesn't always happen. So I have always felt like the best thing to do is just to try and be as close with people as I can, try to be on their good side as best I can. And when those things in life do happen, where, whether it's something tragic or whether it's a high amount of stress and anxiety, whatever it is, that I would be able to be there for them and then help introduce them not to just who Jesus is, but to what he has to offer, his love, his grace, all those
Mhm.
different kinds of things, so they can
Sure.
recognize that. So that's always been what I've tried to do, and I felt like that's always how the church has been most successful in helping people is, offering them what they need in that point in time when they
Mhm.
actually
Yeah.
realize it, if that makes sense.
It makes sense, and the best thing that we can do as Christians is just to be involved in the lives of our friends and neighbors and those we love, because the most effective evangelism happens right that way. Is just from us being involved and being a part of each other's lives. Um,
Certainly.
that's the mission of the church. God chose his vehicle for spreading the gospel on this planet is the church. And so if we really want to reach the world, we just need to be involved.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. Well, we can stay involved with this next topic, Dan, the homebody
Nice
generation.
segue.
There we go. The homebody generation, why Gen Z prefers staying in. This article that we have linked, if you want to read it, explores how Gen Z has embraced a homebody lifestyle driven by both financial concerns and social anxiety, particularly in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. Instead of participating in your traditional social settings, young adults are opting for smaller, more intimate gatherings, which has contributed to a sense of isolation and loneliness. As this generation retreats from public spaces, they also risk missing out on meaningful relationship. This shift poses a challenge for churches seeking to engage younger generations. Dan, I think anybody who's been paying attention to society has seen this happening,
Yep.
not only since COVID, but a little bit before COVID and stuff like that. Even small things, record stores, you don't have people coming in and listening. Comic book stores, you don't have people going there and just reading comics, spending time with each other. I mean, those are smaller examples, but things
Sure,
like
sure,
that
sure.
have seemed to kind of go by the wayside. So my question for you, Dan, is that in light of the Gen Z's preference or what they're getting at, I don't even know if I'd call it preference at this point, for staying
Yeah.
in smaller gatherings, how do you think churches can create spaces or programs that feel more comfortable and welcoming for the younger generation to combat their loneliness?
Uh, I'm this is the $1,000,000 question, man. I mean, I think that this is one of those areas where we have to evolve as a church and as in trying to do ministry in general. This is kind of a new frontier because I think what we're seeing here is a bit of a cultural shift. And I know for me personally, I am a homebody. I am not a Gen Zer, but I have always been a homebody. And I've even noticed for us, especially since we'll call it the pandemic, the COVID-19 mess, since all that stuff went down, we spend a lot more time at home than we used to. There are simple things that we used to do that, I mean, things like little things like going to the movies. I think we've been to the movies twice in the last few years. Doctor Strange and then the Minions or something like that. Like
Yeah.
very, very rarely, which that was something that, 5, 6 years ago, we might go to the movies every month. You know what I mean? And some of that is expense, and it's not just the cost of movie tickets. I mean, let's face it, it costs a lot more to live right now than it did 5 or 6 years ago. Things are more expensive. And so there's just less financial room to go out and to have fun and do fun things out. Um, so what we're seeing here is kind of a cultural shift with younger people. Now, what can the church do to meet that? Man, I have racked my brain over this. I do think there's another component that this article doesn't bring up explicitly because it kind of paints a picture that a lot of these young people are sitting at home in a dark room with the windows shut, just with their head in their hands, being isolated. But I think this is me, but I think that the social sphere has moved. I think that people are still very much interactive, but the way that they are interactive and the relationships that are being formed have shifted. And there's a million facets of that we could talk about. But I do know a tremendous number of these young people do social gaming. They do there, of course, social media, obviously, and connecting with people, commenting, um doing that sort of thing. A lot of the sphere has moved online, and so that brings me back to thinking about the Great Commission, where he says go into all the world. Well, where is the Gen Z world right now? The Gen Z world is online. So to me, that would say the church needs to adapt with more of a technological online focus. What that looks like, what
Yeah.
are your thoughts? You know more about this stuff than I do, because I don't even
Yeah.
like being online all that much.
I think what we're doing right now is a part of it. I think a lot of people kind of get their entertainment and things like that from online shows or whatever else it might
Yeah.
be, and they tend to find community there. Also, social media is a huge piece of it as well. But I've always thought that trying to do more events with a purpose is kind of a big thing to me.
Okay.
One reason why, and I have people in my life that are younger who are a bit more isolated, and speaking to them, it seems like one of their bigger issues with going to events that are mainly just like, hey, come and hang out, is the social anxiety of like, well, who am I going to talk to? Where am I going to stand? What am I going to, all this
Right.
kind of stuff. And so you try to do more things with a purpose for them to do, for them to be involved in. That's one of the
Yeah.
reasons why Shaylee and I started doing the packing party for the Operation Christmas Child, because it is a way for our church to get together and do something, but also have a purpose in doing that. You don't just get there and sip on some punch and, hear, people
Mingle.
talk to each
Yeah.
other. Right. That can be a little bit of an anxious situation for people who are struggling socially, but you put them in an environment where, hey, show up, go grab a box, fold it, fill it with stuff, put it in a van, go grab a box, fold it, fill it with stuff, put it in a van. As you're doing that, you are interacting with other people, you're talking, but there's not so much the social pressure of, trying to, figure out who am I going to mingle with and what kind of small talk
Right.
about the weather am I going to
Right.
have, you know?
Right. Yeah.
So, those are some things that I feel like can be helpful. And also, it's just helpful for other people as well, because not only do you feel like you're with your church community, but you also feel like you're doing something as well. Feel like you're serving, feel like you're helping. That was one of the things I loved that Jay did with the food drive that we had
Yeah.
back in the
Yeah.
COVID times, is how many of us were able to show up. We were able to kind of help people park. We were able to kind of help people give out food and stuff like that. But we were also doing it together as a church. And so you are building community that way.
Right
These
on.
and we still have some of the other ways too. We just had last Sunday we had Country Day with a dinner and then a show and stuff like that. And there's
Yeah.
definitely a place for those too. But for me, I feel like it kind of extinguishes a bit of the social anxiety when you give somebody something to do and not just like, hey, come in and have a meal and sit down. Not bashing that at all. I
Right,
think that's great. I just think
right,
there needs to be kind of a balance between the two. Does that make sense?
right. And I think the challenge too, especially for those of us that have been doing church for a long time, is there's always this temptation to want to take y- like I'm going to say younger people right now, but I'm going to say to take younger people and fit them into our mold.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, okay, we've got young people that need to know Jesus. Let's have a potluck. But what if they don't want to come to a potluck? Well, they should want to come to the potluck, because there's
Yeah.
that sort of conversation that goes on. We have to be the ones that are adapting because literally you can almost look at it not just like younger people, but you're dealing with a different culture of people. You're dealing with people who literally do not think or like the same things that you do. And that's where the big challenge comes in. I like what you said about, basically giving them a purpose
Yeah.
for being there. You're giving them value by allowing them to contribute. And then through that, you can facilitate some connection and conversation and whatever. It's a
Yeah.
good place to start, I think.
Yeah, I heard at a conference even before COVID, the speaker was talking about his church and trying to get more, younger people involved. And they found
Yeah.
that at their events where they would be doing some kind of mission work or something like that,
Yeah.
like I think they painted a school at one point or something. So one of their ways of trying to get more involved with the school in the area, they came in and they painted classrooms,
Yeah.
and they did that multiple times. And he told me or he told the conference that at the events where they just got together and mingled and hung out,
Hmm.
hardly anybody who wasn't from their church was there. Those were
Right.
mostly just kind of, and those were intended for the other people who were not in the church because they were doing them a service. They were saying, "Come in, we'll feed you, we'll hang out together," stuff like that.
Right.
But
Right.
people weren't coming to stuff like that. But when they were going to the school and they were painting, people were bringing their friends and their friends were coming in and helping. And so he told me that, or he told the conference that they were they were actually forming more relationships with people outside their church by going into the community and serving not the
Yeah.
people they were going to serve, but that what other people were coming to serve with them and trying to help do something good for the community, which is a little backward than what you would think, right? You would think, oh well,
Yeah.
the new people will come to the stuff that we're doing service for them, and then all of our people will come when we're doing service for somebody else. It was kind of
Yeah.
vice versa. Now, again, I'm not saying one is right and one is wrong. I think they both serve a purpose, but I think it's interesting that many young people are more driven by doing something and being active rather
Yeah.
than, hey, I'm going to come in and sit down and you're going to feed me food or something like that. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? I'm caught on
Right.
the food thing, but that's just what's on my mind right now. There's other examples as well. So,
Well, and we tend to think that younger generations are motivated by mindless self-indulgence. But what a lot of the studies show is that the younger generation, one of the things that they're searching for, which this makes sense to me because we live in a culture of near nihilism, is that they're searching for the ability to have significance and make a difference in the world around them. And so the church can actually provide a service both to them and say to that school that got painted or whatever, by basically setting up an opportunity for a person to make a difference in somebody else's life, and to contribute
right.
something. Because I think there's a lot of people, especially young people out there looking for that. You know, there's a lot of people that are young people that are very, very discontent with just existing, and they want to make a difference. So there's a symbiosis there that I think the church can lean into.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very interesting. Very interesting. All right, Dan, we'll get to our last
All right.
subject here and then we'll get out of here. So, like I said, this one's going to be a little bit more of a heavier, deeper subject, but we're not going to get political with it. I'll explain here in a second. But the subject is, does the push for perfect babies reveal our broken moral compass? Dan, I came across an article
Yeah.
about some new genetic screening that I think this was announced about a week ago, so we're a little late talking about it. But essentially, the article discusses the ethical concerns surrounding the rise of genetic screening, particularly companies offering wealthy couples the ability to select embryo based on traits like IQ. And Fox News even went as far as to say they could rank up to 100 embryos based on IQ, sex, height, risk of obesity, and risk of mental illness. While genetic testing is already used to prevent inherited diseases, the prospect of choosing attributes like intelligence raises questions about society's growing purpose of perfection and control over life. This shift also reflects a broader cultural change where values and morals seem to increasingly disconnected from spiritual or sacred principles. Now, I want to be very clear. This is not a conversation. If you know about genetic screening, this is not a conversation about if IVF is wrong or right or things like that. This is more of a conversation of the advancement of that and deciding, do we want to have a child if they have a good enough IQ rating, right? Because that's really what this kind of genetic piece is getting more into here. So I know people who have thought about IVS. I know people who have had IVF. It's not exactly what we're talking about in this situation here, but it does kind of go in line there. I just want to make that point clear before we continue to get into it. Dan, how do you feel about the idea of parents using genetic screening to select embryos based on traits like their IQ levels? Do you think it reflects a deeper moral issue, or is it just a new form of parental care?
How do I feel about it, or what do I think about it?
You can take it either way.
Because I feel disgusted by it. I feel disgusted by it. I think that God created the process of reproduction. And I think that when we begin to interject ourselves into that process, some very, very hairy types of situations come up. And it gets very hard to explain because this is an incredibly complicated issue that would take a hours to unpack completely. But what I see here, and obviously this is mostly an option currently for wealthy couples. I mean, this process of embryonic screening, we're talking
And
about
only in
tens of
America
thousands.
too. It's actually illegal in the UK. I read it in another article.
Is it really illegal in the
Yeah, you
UK? Well,
can't you can't do genetic screenings based on IQ level in the UK.
that's ethical, I think, because basically what you're saying is that, we get to determine the value of our offspring. We already have there is an epidemic right now in American culture where, and I think this article references it, where the vast majority of babies that are diagnosed with Down syndrome prenatally, they're just aborted. They're just gotten rid of. They're just thrown away in the garbage, because obviously they have no value if they are going to be born with Down syndrome. And this brings into conflict, a direct conflict between our values as people versus God's value of people. Okay? Because what we value is not what God values. They are opposed, they are at odds. God does not value the intelligent person more than he values a lesser intelligent person. God does not value the person with autism less than he values a person without. God's value system does not work on this kind of selective process. And when we start to tamper with these kind of things, we get into some very, very risky territory. I think we get into some very, very risky territory. I have tried to understand for years the concept of disparity. Okay, why some have and some have not, why some people are beautiful and why some people are ugly. We run the gamut. People are all over the place. And I've wondered, it's like, God, why would you do that? Why would you make somebody stunningly beautiful and then have this person born with an unfortunate disfigurement, which makes them unappealing visually? Like, what's up with that? But really, it doesn't matter, because God does not put his value on people based upon those kinds of conditions. We are all his creation, equally loved by him and beloved by him because of our uniqueness. I mean, and what was it? It was we were at this just popped into my head, but we did GLS a couple months ago, and that
Mm,
lady came on who was paralyzed, right? Who had done
yeah.
this wonderful not-for-profit ministry and had affected the lives of millions of people because she had a problem, but instead of caving to it, she utilized it, right? And has done wonderful things. And there is more glory to God in that than I just we are playing God at this point, and
Yeah.
that bothers me.
I mean, it's one of the most mentioned verses in the Bible, but what was said to David, that God looks at the heart, he doesn't look at physical appearance. I mean, that
That's right.
is what is completely true. And for me, I look at the situation and I think, unfortunately, this is nothing new. This is nothing new. Technology has gotten better, and our understanding and what we can control has gotten better. But guess what? Back in biblical times, what happened if you had a baby and it was either disfigured, maybe it had
Yep.
Down syndrome, maybe you didn't want it because it was with a partner that you just decided, you couldn't raise a child with, whatever was
Yep.
there, what would you do with it? You would take it
You'd put
outside
it
the mall.
outside the city gates. Yep.
Yep.
Hmm.
And then the animal would come and eat it or whatever else, or it would sit
Yep.
there until it died. And what did Christians do? Christians came along.
Started gathering them up.
They started gathering the children and taking them back to their home, raising them as their own, and caring for them. Now, it, am I accusing Christians here of doing this? No. In the article, I don't remember it saying this is specifically Christians doing this or anything like that. But the whole
Yeah.
idea of ranking your embryo based on which would be the best, which would be the one with the highest likelihood of being, the best sports athlete, or the least likely obese embryo and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That's not love. That's not care and concern for who I have. That is a status symbol. That
You know
is,
what?
I want something specifically for
Yeah.
my significant other. Go ahead.
And you know what just occurred to me? If you choose a child based upon their characteristics, if you're basically trying to custom order your offspring, that all of a sudden what that child has to offer becomes completely about you and what you intend to get out of that child. I don't want to have a wimpy little child. I want an athletic child. And I paid for that athletic child. And so when that athletic child grows up, guess what? I don't care what they want. They're going to play whatever. You know what I mean? Or I want an intelligent child. I'm going to pick the one with the highest IQ. And this guy's going to Harvard. I don't care if his passion is basketball. You're going to Harvard, kid. I mean, stuff like that. All of a
Yeah.
sudden, that could completely change the framework. Whereas when you have a child naturally, your concern comes for the child and discovering them. Who is this little person going to be? And then bringing that out of them and nurturing that in them. And I see all kinds of problems
Yeah.
with this, man.
Yeah. Unfortunately, a friend of my family back in Ohio, he and his wife had a child, and they were told it was going to be a boy. I don't know what happened. I mean, things have gotten
Yeah.
better, but obviously not everything, they didn't do IVF, so they didn't know exactly. But on the ultrasounds, they
Right.
were told it would be a boy. And he was all energetic and all excited and, super happy. Well,
Hmm.
time comes and it's not a boy, it's a girl. They had prepared everything for it to be a boy. And when a girl came,
Surprise.
yeah, she didn't care. She loved it no matter what. But he immediately had a I don't want to say a distaste, but he was not nearly as excited for the child as he once was, because he wanted a boy who would be able to take on his family name, and he would be able to coach into a sports star and all this different stuff. And that really started to open my eyes into, the idea of family and what we have, and are we truly trying to raise a family and trying to help if we're putting our own preferences and putting our own desires into our offspring, instead of just saying we're going to be a family and we're going to love this child no matter what.
Right.
And to me, that was always, that it still is impactful in my mind to think through, I want the best for my child, but I don't want to
Yeah.
put stipulations onto my child and say, you're not successful unless you do A, B, and C, because at the end of the day, I don't know the path for that child in their life. Only God knows the path for that child in their life.
That's right.
And, I'm going to do my best to love the child no matter what. I mean, I have 2 children now, and I feel the same way about them. If,
Hmm.
Lottie wants to grow up and be a soccer star, great. She wants to grow up and go to Harvard, great. She wants to grow up and do none of that, sure, whatever.
Sure. Whatever. Yeah. Be
Obviously,
who
I think
God.
there are. Go ahead.
It just occurred to me, we oftentimes talk about raising our children to be who God called them to be. And if we start playing God, the expectation on them will be to grow up in who we've called them to be.
Mhm.
It's like, you don't understand. I picked you because this is your purpose. These are the qualities that you were chosen to. This is why you're in this world. Oh man, it gets so hairy.
Yeah, and I think it's an important thing for us as parents to reflect into our lives, because the easy thing to say is, "Oh, I don't care what my child's IQ level is. I'm going to love them regardless." Okay. But are you, like you just said, are you calling your child to be something, and will you be disappointed if they're not?
Right.
Instead, are you actually just trusting God to call this child to be who they are,
Hmm.
and have God lead them to that, and declare that you don't know all the answers. You don't know all the truths. You don't know every single detail. Obviously, you might have your preferences, but you're going to trust God to lead that child to who they
Right.
are, rather than who you say they are or who you think they are, type of deal. And so
Sure.
I think it's an important conversation and understanding unconditional love and the aspect of, you know, whoever this child becomes or whoever this child is, I'm going to love them regardless. Dan, how does your understanding of unconditional love, whether it's spiritual or moral, shape your thoughts on whether parents should be able to choose certain traits or the certain points of their future, whatever it might be? Do you think this undermines the nature of unconditional love, like I do?
Does it undermine the nature of unconditional love? That's a very good question. I would think that it does. And the reason that I think that it does is unconditional love takes yourself out of the equation. If you love someone unconditionally, that means that that love is going to be present for them regardless of your role in the relationship. Whether this person, be it a child, be it a relative, be it a close friend, whatever, no matter what this person does to you personally, your love will still be present for them. And I think that as soon as we start dictating characteristics, as soon as we start basically injecting ourselves into the equation of who the child is, we're going to make it very, very difficult to just to remove ourselves from the equation, because we are now stepping into a role that I think was only meant for God.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to what you said at the beginning of we're just trying to play God now. And in
That's what it feels
reality,
like to me.
yeah, in reality, we're not fit to play God.
No,
None
we're
of us
not.
are
No,
anywhere
we're not.
near fit to play that role. And
Hmm.
that's the hardest part about all of this in life, not just having children, not just living your own life, not just your future, not just everything in life is trusting that whatever God does is for his plan and it all works together for his good, right? What
Hmm.
he sees as good. That's always been a book idea of mine is defining good because what
Right,
you might
right.
see as good, I'm not saying you in particular, I'm just saying other people, what other people see as good, or what you yourself see as good might not be exactly what God sees as good.
Exactly.
And
It's
that's
almost like we
thing.
it's almost like we need a stable, moral, unchanging standard to follow. Hmm.
A book perhaps full of
Maybe
truth.
maybe so. Might be helpful. Oh, if only
Maybe
we had such a thing. Oh, wait.
I got a bookshelf over here. I think I could find one. No, yeah,
and that's
and
and
again,
that's
I
really what this comes down to with this situation. With these kinds of very complex issues, the thing to do is to go back to the scripture, try to decipher, study, figure out what God's value system is, and then bring into our lives what we believe he would think of this kind of behavior. We need to go back to him, his truth, his guidance.
yeah, precisely, precisely. And like I said, it goes back to the heart, right? For every single
Yes.
person, it goes back to your heart. What are your intentions? What are you trying to do? If it's just for you to play God and for you to have your own preference, I wouldn't rely on that. But if it's through you trying to serve God, you trying to have unconditional love, you trying to be more like God, I think that's much safer to follow rather than the latter or the other option that I mentioned. So, and before we are done with this conversation, like I said, I just want to say, like, again, this conversation was not about IVF and stuff like that. I know a couple that went through IVF because their children have all had difficult diseases to deal with in their lives, and so they did IVF so that way their next child would not have that disease. It wasn't because they didn't want a child unless they didn't have a disease or anything like that. They were just trying to help their next child by not having them have the disease. So I'm not saying IVF is wrong or anything like that. We're talking about a much more expansive piece of it that is based on preference and, in my mind, a selfishness rather than trying to do what's
Hmm.
best for your kids. So, Dan, any further thoughts on that before we're done there?
Not for now. This is a complicated subject.
It is very complicated. I hope we hit on it well enough. As per usual, if you have any comments that you'd like to share with us and maybe give your thoughts and your opinion on it, we'd be more than welcome to hear those and maybe converse about them. You can always email me, comment on the YouTube video if you're watching on YouTube, or just catch Dan and I in person. We see you just about every Sunday, if not every Sunday. So catch us and
Pretty
talk to
much.
us. Yep. We'd love to speak to you. Dan, anything going on in the worship ministry? Country Day is over, so that's one
Country
thing
days.
that's done.
Yeah.
But anything else going on in the worship ministry you want to talk about?
Anything going on in the worship ministry I would like to talk about? Not specifically. I mean, what we do in the worship ministry is kind of, I guess it's kind of a grind, man. It's week to week. There's always Sunday's always coming. I just, we're always looking for, I say this every time, but it's the truth. We're always looking for more people that want to invest in being a part of the worship team, not necessarily on stage, but behind the scenes. We could always use a few more willing people to do some fairly simple tasks behind the scenes, because The challenge is, what you see is what's on the stage. What makes it happen, you can't see. And that is
Hmm.
just as vital as what happens up on the stage. It's one big unit. So, if you don't like being seen, that's okay. A number of the positions you basically hide. Because not everybody, and I get it too, not everybody likes being on the stage, and that's
Yeah.
cool. So, but yeah, that's about it. Just if the Lord's put it on your heart to serve, we've had a lot of sermons lately about service, and giving your time and whatnot like that. If that's on your heart right now, um, I any of us would love to talk to you about that. I sure would. And if it looks like your talents aren't jiving, we'll find something else. You know what I mean? Sometimes service is a process. It's not like you pick the first thing and go, "Oh, this is my fit." Sometimes you got to go through a few until you find where God can really use you. So
Very
that's about
true.
it for now.
Very true. Nothing going on with the Christmas services, Christmas Eve services that you need help with or anything like
Not
that?
specifically. They're going to be a little more low key this year. I think we're going to
Mhm.
go a little more traditional and a little more sober, solemn, lower, really just focus on the manger in a different way this year. Last few years, we've kind of done like the production screens, music, audio, drama, that sort of thing, which is cool. I think this year we may just, do some caroling and keep it a little more intimate. We'll see. We'll see. I'm still working on the final plan for that.
There you go. That's why you tune into FCC Talk. You get the future planning of the
Get the
Christmas Eve
inside scoop.
services.
Yeah. All the information you never wanted to know here on FCC Talk.
All right, Dan. Thanks so much for coming on FCC Talk and talking through
Absolutely.
these topics. Thank you everybody for listening. We do appreciate it, and we will have another episode for you next Thursday on FCC Talk. Have a good one.
All right. Bye.